Is the 1DX Mark III going to be anything like the 5D Mark V? No. And I wouldn't even ask this question for the continuations of all of these cameras, the new iterations for any of cameras, 5D, Canon's 5Ds or 1Ds. I would never ask this question ever again because why? They will never be the same beast. And I'm going to explain why in this video. Now, I might be looking down at my specs, but I got various specs on Canon cameras over the years featuring the 5Ds and the 1Ds. Now, I'm starting with the 1DX because that kind of issues this newer generation of flagship cameras for Canon. So I'm not going to be talking about the 1DS because they're just too old. I'm not talking about those cameras, they're too old. But I'm probably going to start somewhere around the 5D Mark II for this newer generation of camera that I'm talking about with Canon. I'm not going to be encompassing every single flagship and 5D that has ever come out. I'm not going to be doing that. But even when these cameras come out, Canon is the same company. So you have to understand that understanding what these new cameras are going to be, you have to understand what Canon already is because Canon is not a company that changed. So once you understand that Canon is not really a company that does a lot of change over time, you start to understand that the camera won't really change its nature. So whatever model it is, whatever nature it has, it's probably going to keep that same nature. The nature of the 1DX series is the flagship, the fastest shooting camera, not the highest megapixel, probably the lowest megapixel Canon camera that you can buy at the time. But it's fast. It can allow you to do anything with the buffer. It can allow you to do anything with frames per second, everything like that. It's not centric for video. It's centric for speed and ability to shoot at fast frames a second, almost like you're shooting video with photography. So you understand that that's the beast, the 1DX. But you have to also understand that the 5D Mark whatever or the 5D series itself is designed for it to be the all-in-one, the jack of trades but the master of none kind of camera. It is supposed to be that camera that you're able to do sports, but you can do weddings with it and have a nice high result with it. You can do video with it, and it focuses on the actual presence of the image quality, the size of the image is usually bigger than the 1DX, and it's a slightly slower camera because it processes more memory, trying to get you a more polished looking image instead of making the actual capturing of the image the highlight of the priority. As a matter of fact, most of the autofocusing systems from the 5Ds tend to be recycled. 61 autofocus point systems with the same kind of area coverage, all this other stuff. But we'll get into that in just a second. But that just gives you an idea of what to think about when you think about the 5D Mark series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The biggest leap in megapixels I've ever seen from the 5D series was from the 5D Mark 1 to the 5D Mark 2. But we'll get into that. All right, so we're not really talking about 5D Mark V and its leaked specs today. We're really just talking about whether or not the 5D Mark V is going to be anything like the 1DX Mark III that just came out, is slated to really come out in February. I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think they're going to share anything but the auto focusing system and maybe the video system, because everything else with the photography is dramatically different with the 1DX and the 5D series. So when you understand that, it's probably going to come out with certain specs that match that. So now to prove that the 1DX Mark III is not going to be exactly like the 5D Mark IV, well, first off, before I get into any facts, selling a camera that has similar specs to another camera at a dramatically different cost is not good for any brand. Even though Canon likes to get away with this, they're not going to do that for the 5D Mark V in this situation. So that's the first caveat. The next thing you need to understand is that the 1DX was a camera with 18 megapixels, right? And then you had the 1DX Mark II. This has 20 megapixels. So just a 2 megapixel increment change. Now you go to 1DX Mark III, which has a 20.1 megapixel sensor. So obviously Canon this is what almost a 12-year difference, 12-year span, excuse me, not a 12-year difference, but a 12-year span. This 12-year span, you're telling us users that megapixels doesn't matter for this camera. Megapixels is not what's going to sell this camera. But if I start to look down here at the frames per second, first off, for the 1DX, we're starting at a 14 frames a second. There's no other Canon camera on the market that can do 14 frames a second unless you're looking at a lower iteration of the 1D series. If it's not a 1D series, it don't shoot over 10 frames a second is what I'm telling you. So, you start on 14 frames a second with the 1DX. Then you have 16 frames per second with the 1DX Mark II. And now with the 1DX Mark III, you're looking at a 20 frames a second with live view on the 1DX Mark III. But I think it's like an 18 frames a second with mechanical shutter. I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me on that, but just look it up for yourself. But it's pretty much, it's a 2 frames per second increase interval for the 1DX. But noting that the 5D Mark IV only shoots like 7 or 8 frames a second tells you something about this camera. It's going to be dramatically different when it comes to shooting frames per second. All right, but this is over a 12-year increment. So you're looking at the 5D Mark II. You're looking at a 3.9, 4 frames a second. 5D Mark III, 6 frames a second. 5D Mark IV, 7 frames a second. Why should I think that there's going to be a big improvement in frames per second? Because historically it hasn't been there. So one thing that I can count on is a change in video specs. And that's something that I can count on for the 5D Mark IV to have. With video specs, let's start with the 1D series. 1DX, 1080p at 30 frames a second, 720 at 60. All right, that's good. 1DX Mark II, 4K at 60, 1080 at 120. All right, now all of these videos have caveats to them, whether it be a crop or whether it be no sound or no audio. 1DX Mark III with the 5.5K, but we'll get to that later. Of course, like I just said, the 1DX Mark III with the 5.5K, I think that's 60 FPS at max. And it has other specs, but we're not talking about that right now. We're thinking about the actual change of the specs over time, and yes, video has changed as far as specs over time for the 1DX Mark III. Well, why would the video specs change for the 1DX Mark III? Well, because it's a journalist camera, and if you're at the Olympics, video is maybe even more popular than photography nowadays, because everybody can do photography with their cell phone and everything like that, but video has become increasingly popular. So you're going to need some kind of remotely good specs to wow somebody. And the only way to really get remotely good specs to wow somebody is either to have a high frames per second or to have a better, I would say, resolution. So 5.5K, 6K. And this also competes with Sony with the 6K sensor downscale to 4K. So it makes you think that Canon's listening to us. And so let's go down to the 5D series. 5D series, we're talking about 5D Mark II, 1080 at 30 and 480 at 60. And then 5D Mark III, you got the 1080 at 30 and 720 at 60. Then you have the 5D Mark IV with 4K 30, 1080 60, 720 at 120 frames a second. Now, this is good, but this is pretty much carbon copy from the 1DX series. So you can imagine that the only thing that the 1DX series is going to keep. So these are one of the things that you can imagine is going to just be recycled down to the 5D Mark V. The next thing you want to think about is really go over fast. It's the card system. We always know the 1DX card system is always different from the 5D card system. So let's go with the 1DX Mark I. 2 CF cards. 1DX Mark II, 1 CF card, 1 CFS card. 1DX Mark III, 2 CF Express card slots. So it's never been the same as the 5D series at all. So let's go to the 5D series. We got 1 CF card for the 5D Mark II. We have 1 CF card and 1 SD card for the 5D Mark III. And we have 1 SD card and 1 CF card for the 5D Mark IV. These cameras have not changed. So card slot is not something that you're probably going to see. You might see 1 CF Express card slot in the 5D Mark IV, but the other one's probably going to be an SD. UHS Mark II. Why? Because they hadn't really given it to us, Canon. Never mind. I'm not going to argue with Canon today. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is autofocus point system. This is another thing that I think is going to be handed down from the pretty much for the last two cameras that have come out in the 5D series, you got the 61-point autofocusing system. Same thing with the 1DX system. 1DX Mark, I think the 1DX Mark 1 had the 61 autofocus system, point system, and 1DX Mark 2 had the 61 autofocus point system. These last two iterations, all four of these cameras pretty much had the exact same focusing system. The 5D Mark III, the 5D Mark IV, the 1DX Mark I, and the 1DX Mark II pretty much all had the same focus points. Now, the system was a little bit different. Okay, you're going to argue with me in the comments. Oh, it was a little bit different. There's some focus points you can use on the edge, a little bit more center point, cross type, autofocus. 61 autofocus points, pretty much the same focusing area. It really doesn't help you that much. It's the same focusing system. Same thing that was in the 7D Mark II. Long live the 7D series. But nevertheless, that's going to be pretty much the same. So since the 1DX Mark III now has a 191 autofocus point system, I'm pretty sure that the 5D Mark V is going to have a 191 point autofocus system. So those are the only two things that I was going to think is going to be handed down: the video capabilities and the focus point system. That's the only two things that are going to be handed down to the 5D Mark V. But I really hope they make it into a hybrid video camera or hybrid mirrorless camera DSLR jigger. I'm voting for whatever Tony Northrup said, because that makes more sense for Canon to stay on the game, because they got a camera that can do everything that everybody wants and can do software capability things or algorithms as good as it can do taking pictures. And you can look at, you know what I'm saying, guys. You know what I'm saying. I'm saying you can look through that viewfinder and have good results, but at the same time, you can enjoy all the luxuries of a mirrorless camera. I do not think that this new camera is going to have IBIS, because these higher end cameras tend to, let's put it this way: IBIS and a flip out screen for the 5D series and the 1DX series is a farce, in my opinion, based off what Canon's thinking. Because Canon says, oh, well, if you put a flip out screen on the 1DX, it's going to be not durable anymore. Okay, well, if it's not durable anymore, what about the 5D series? 5D series is the only series that I think may have a flip out screen, but they still want to keep that durability, so I doubt they're going to have. I'm on the side of doubting that they're going to have a flip out screen. But at any rate, guys, this is done with CenturyFX Studios. I know I went on a big diatribe about this, but I'm pretty sure that the 1DX series is not going to mimic the 5D Mark IV series or the 5D series at all in this new next iteration. The 1DX3 is not going to look much like the 5D Mark IV, so that gives me a little bit of hope, because the 1DX Mark III is a good camera, but I think the 5D is going to be way more popular. Stay tuned for the next video.